I stood in that elegant ballroom, where music filled every corner and the laughter of guests echoed throughout. I held my wine glass with discomfort, carefully maintaining a smile I had practiced in front of my mirror that morning. After months of emotional distance, I had hoped the evening would be a chance to repair my relationship with my husband, Tyler. I had chosen my dress with such care, wearing the elegant one I knew Tyler always loved. But from the moment we arrived, he barely glanced in my direction. Tyler was too busy greeting his friends, basking in the attention he always craved. I watched him move through the crowd, charming everyone in his path. When he finally approached me with a glass in hand and that arrogant smile I knew too well, I felt a painful relief, foolishly thinking things might improve. Tyler spoke to me in that intimidating tone I had grown to know over our years together, saying how miraculous it was that I had come without complaining. I remained silent, trying to ignore the discomfort his words stirred inside me. But Tyler wasn't finished. He stepped onto the impromptu stage and took the microphone, as the guests turned to face him. He raised his glass and called out to everyone, thanking them for being there on this special night. The crowd applauded, expecting some light pleasantries. I stood at the back of the room, watching him, hoping he might say something kind about our marriage, some words of appreciation, any gesture of acknowledgement. But Tyler had other plans. With a mocking smile, he continued, saying that marriage isn't easy, especially when your wife forgets to be attractive. Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the crowd of guests. I felt my stomach clench as if someone had punched me. Tyler added with malicious eyes, wondering aloud how I could wear that dress as if I were still 20. His words felt like a dagger straight through my heart. As the air seemed to leave my lungs, the laughter around me grew louder, though still restrained but unmistakable. Tyler, clearly enjoying the moment, continued by saying that no sane man would want someone who's withering away, not even him. I felt my entire body freeze. I wanted to disappear, but my feet seemed nailed to the floor. I wanted to scream, but no words would come out of my mouth. I could only hear the laughter, whispers, and feel the pitying glances from the crowd. Tyler, my husband, had publicly shattered me in front of everyone. Without a word, I placed my glass on a nearby table, turned on my heel, and walked away from the party. I couldn't bear to stay there for even one more second. Each step I took toward the exit was a desperate attempt to keep myself from falling apart completely. As I stepped through the door, the first tears spilled from my eyes, but I didn't stop walking. I knew exactly where I needed to go. I arrived at my mother's house in the darkness of night. My footsteps echoed on the empty sidewalk, as if the world was wrapped in complete silence, indifferent to the storm raging inside me. When I crossed the threshold, my mother Joanne welcomed me without questions, with worried eyes and open arms. I collapsed into her embrace, as if finally letting go of an unbearable burden. That night, no words were spoken. As she rested her head on top of mine, silent tears kept flowing from my eyes. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea in my hands, I finally allowed myself to be completely enveloped by grief. I felt I had lost more than just my husband. I had lost my dignity, my dreams, and my self-respect. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the worn curtains, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest. I knew I had to move forward, but I had no idea where to begin. My mother moved quietly in the kitchen, making coffee, waiting for me to find my words. I finally spoke with a trembling voice, telling her I never thought Tyler would humiliate me like this. She set the coffee maker down on the stove and sat down across from me. She looked at me gently, but without pity. She told me I had spent far too long living to please that man, and it was time to start thinking about myself. Her words hit me like a punch of reality. For years, I had shaped my life around Tyler, trying to be the woman he wanted. And it had all been for nothing, leaving me alone, broken, and stranded in the middle of a life that no longer felt like my own. For the next few days, I avoided social media, but one afternoon, unable to resist my curiosity, I checked Tyler's profile. It was like reopening an unhealed wound. Among the photos and comments, I discovered recent pictures of him with another woman, a young dancer with a slim figure and his flirtatious gaze upon her. I needed no further proof. Tyler had betrayed me. Something began to burn inside me, like a flame that had been dormant for years. As I closed my phone with determination, I thought to myself that I would no longer cry for someone who had never truly valued me. That night, I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. My swollen eyes and pale face reflected my exhaustion, but behind that broken image, I could feel a spark of determination beginning to grow. I decided it was time to reclaim what I had lost: my strength, my identity, and my self-respect. The days at my mother's house passed slowly, but each day felt like a small victory. I began to find a sense of control in everyday tasks that I had lost during my marriage. Organizing the house, preparing meals, and listening to her loving voice became the foundation of my new daily routine. The wounds were still open, but I no longer felt defeated. One afternoon, while cleaning the windows of Mom's small sewing workshop in the backyard, I decided it was time to take action. I took out an old notebook and started jotting down ideas for a small business, something productive to occupy my mind and restore the sense of purpose I had lost under Tyler's shadow. That evening, after a simple dinner with Mom, I retrieved a box from the closet that I had avoided opening for a long time. As I gently wiped my old sewing machine, I remembered the years when I dreamed of designing my own fashion line. I told myself firmly that if I was going to start over, this would be my beginning. In the days that followed, I devoted myself to regaining my sewing skills. My hands were clumsy at first, but soon the memory returned, along with the joy of creating something from scratch. Each stitch became a small step toward emotional recovery, a thread stitching together my shattered self-esteem. One afternoon, while adjusting the final touches on a dress, I heard footsteps. I looked up at the sound of someone approaching through the hallway. There was Caleb, the young man I had met by chance at a cafe a few days earlier. His presence surprised me, but it wasn't unwelcome. Rather, it felt like fate sending me a signal at exactly the right moment. Caleb stood at the door with a friendly smile, asking if he was interrupting. I returned his smile and told him not at all, surprised by how soft my own voice sounded. He stepped forward and studied the fabrics and patterns on the table with interest. He asked with genuine curiosity if I was a designer. I told him I had tried in the past, but things hadn't worked out quite as planned. Caleb picked up a piece of fabric, examining it with a mixture of admiration and gentleness in his gaze. He told me it was never too late to try again. I felt an unexpected warmth in my chest. There was something in Caleb's gaze. He saw me not as the vulnerable woman Tyler had despised, but as someone capable and worthy of admiration. That chance encounter became the beginning of something deeper. Caleb started dropping by regularly, bringing coffee or just sitting and talking while I worked on my designs. Gradually, I began to trust in Caleb's presence. At first, I couldn't believe that someone so young and attractive could be genuinely interested in me, but as time passed, I stopped questioning and began to enjoy the present. Caleb never demanded anything, nor did he impose expectations. He was simply there, never rushing or pressuring me, accompanying me through my healing process. One night, as I stood in the kitchen, I reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. I was no longer that woman who had fled from the party with a shattered heart. Though the scars remained, they were beginning to transform into lessons. Caleb appeared in the doorway with that smile I had come to recognize as a lighthouse in the storm. He approached without words and took my hand. There were no grand promises or words, just this sincere gesture. In that moment, I understood that perhaps it was possible to find love even after pain. As days passed, I felt the weight of my story with Tyler fading like morning mist, dissipating with the first light of dawn. Painful memories still surfaced occasionally during quiet nights or moments of nostalgia. However, they no longer held the same power over me, they were just shadows of the past that couldn't hinder my progress. When my mind returned to those moments of humiliation and contempt, a new conviction would rise strongly within me. I hadn't just survived, I was thriving. The small sewing workshop, which had started out of economic necessity, quickly evolved into something deeper. Each stitch became a step forward, a way of weaving together a new life. Neighbors began recommending me to their acquaintances, and soon orders increased. I was no longer just doing alterations and hemming, I was creating unique garments with special symbolism. Each piece was a quiet declaration. I was reclaiming myself again. The workshop, once a dusty, forgotten space, became the beating heart of my new reality. The work rhythm was demanding, but unlike before, it didn't exhaust me. With each completed piece, I felt a small victory, as if connecting each thread was also repairing my soul. As weeks passed, I began to recognize myself, again in the mirror, as a strong, capable woman full of possibilities. Caleb remained a pillar throughout this rebuilding process. He was not only emotional support but also a companion ready to share daily burdens without expecting anything in return. His presence was constant but never suffocating. He helped with everything from cleaning the workshop to preparing dinner when I was finishing rush orders. And though he never said it explicitly, Caleb knew that his patience and love were becoming the fertile soil from which I could bloom again. One quiet evening, as Caleb and I were cooking together in our kitchen, a special serenity filled the air. The sound of boiling water and the aroma of freshly baked bread wrapped the room in a cozy atmosphere that felt like a warm embrace. I noticed Caleb pause for a moment, his eyes never leaving me as he watched me with such tender affection that made my heart flutter. He asked me, while drying his hands with a kitchen towel in that gentle way of his, if I realized how far I'd come. I looked at him in surprise, as if the thought had never crossed my mind. I'd been so focused on moving forward, never allowing myself to step back and appreciate what I'd accomplished. I haven't really thought about it, I admitted with a shy smile, my voice carrying a sweet tone of confession. Caleb moved closer slowly, taking my hands in his with the patience of someone who knows true love needs no rushing. He whispered that I should take time to think about it, his words penetrating the walls I'd built around my heart. He told me I'd left behind the woman who never gave herself proper credit for who she was. I felt his words seep deep into my soul, touching places I thought were forever closed. For the first time in my life, someone acknowledged not just my efforts, but my true worth. It was a small moment, but it carried the weight of profound meaning in my life. I was no longer the woman Tyler had belittled, nor the one who'd hidden away after public humiliation. I had become someone who could stand on her own 2 feet, strong and independent.
Meanwhile, Tyler remained trapped in his world of false promises. At first, his affair with the young dancer seemed a perfect fantasy. Secret meetings, passionate nights, and the illusion of an uncomplicated life. But like all superficial things, the charm quickly faded. The dancer who had once admired him began to show her true colors. Demanding, capricious, always expecting more than Tyler could provide. Tyler clung to the relationship, convinced he had made the right decision. Yet deep in his heart, something began to waver. With each show of indifference from the dancer, his inner emptiness became more apparent. The promise of happiness he thought he'd found crumbled in his hands. On lonely nights, Tyler would check his phone, hoping for a message from Carly. He believed she would eventually break, convinced the emotional dependence he'd cultivated over years would bring her back. But all he received was silence. An absolute silence that slowly chipped away at his arrogance. Doubts began to take root in his heart like weeds. What if he had underestimated Carly? What if in abandoning her, he had lost more than he cared to admit? It was a possibility he hadn't allowed himself to consider, but now, every thought of her carried the weight of an uncomfortable truth. Perhaps Carly wasn't just doing fine without him, perhaps she was doing better. Meanwhile, Carly continued weaving the threads of her new life, moving further away each day from the past that had held her captive. With each garment she sewed, each laugh shared with Caleb, and each peaceful moment, the emotional distance from Tyler grew wider. She no longer needed his approval or forgiveness. She had learned to forgive herself and become the master of her own destiny. Caleb, always by her side, never rushed her to define the future of their relationship. He understood that Carly still needed time to heal completely, and that was precisely why she felt safe with him. One afternoon, while organizing her small workshop to handle new orders, she felt a deep peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. For the first time, she stopped thinking about what she had lost and began focusing on what she was building. Tyler's shadow still appeared in her heart, but like echoes from a past that could no longer reach her, it grew more distant with each passing day. The future was full of possibilities. And while Carly wasn't yet certain where her path would lead, she was clear about one thing: she would never again let anyone else determine her worth. Each step taken with Caleb was a reminder that self-respect would always be her greatest victory. Tyler, unaware of all this progress, remained trapped in his illusion of control. But Carly was no longer the same person, and with each passing day, the power he once held over her disappeared like broken threads of a story that was no longer his. Time flowed like a gentle river, and with it, Carly and Caleb's relationship grew stronger in a current of mutual trust and affection. Carly discovered that Caleb's presence not only filled the void Tyler had left but also showed her a healthier way to love. By his side, she learned to trust again, to let go of the anxiety that had tormented her, and to open her heart to the possibility of a better future. Each day spent with Caleb reaffirmed that her life would never be the same again. She was no longer afraid of being vulnerable, knowing that Caleb was a different kind of man, one who didn't demand, compare, or judge. His every gesture, every glance reminded her that love could be light and genuine.
I remember that bright afternoon clearly, after our long walk in the park, when Caleb and I arrived at the little cafe where our relationship had first begun to bloom. The golden sunset light was bathing the outdoor tables, creating such a cozy atmosphere that felt almost magical. My heart skipped a beat when Caleb held my hand while ordering coffee, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. There was something in his expression, a mixture of emotion and nervousness that sparked my curiosity. With his characteristic gentle seriousness, the kind that always made me feel safe, he told me he'd been thinking about something important. He squeezed my hand softly, as if that simple touch could convey his sincerity. Then he asked if we could give ourselves a real chance together. I felt my heart racing. This was something I'd been imagining for so long. After believing I could never trust again, Caleb's words seemed almost surreal. Yet there they were, clear and direct, offering a different future. But the shadows of my past still weighed heavily on my heart. I told him that I truly wanted to be with him too. I paused, looking down, trying to gather my thoughts. I explained that there were things I needed to resolve first. With that patient smile of his, the one that always calmed my doubts, Caleb showed no frustration or urgency. He told me quietly that I didn't need to explain right then, that he just wanted me to know he would be there no matter what happened. His patient attitude finally convinced me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt I could trust someone completely.
Carly knew Caleb was the kind of person she could build a new story with, but she also understood that unresolved issues couldn't be left hanging. Tyler still lingered like a ghost in her life, and before starting anew, she needed one final confrontation.
That night, alone in my room, I made the boldest decision of my life. I knew Tyler would come back eventually. His affair with the young dancer was destined to fail, and in his arrogance, he would try to reclaim me. But this time, I refused to be his victim anymore. The next day, I shared my plan with my mother, Joanne, who listened in silence, struggling to understand my determination. She asked me, with worry in her voice, if I was really sure about this. I nodded with a composure I'd never shown before. The composure of a woman who had finally taken back control of her life. I assured her that this time would be different, that she needed to trust me. Mom tried to speak but couldn't find the words, seeing something in my eyes she'd never seen before. Despite her concerns, I could tell she was proud of my courage. I left nothing to chance and carefully chose the setting for the final confrontation. After some thought, I decided to host a party similar to the one where Tyler had insulted me in public. I knew he would try to manipulate me again, expecting everything to work out in his favor as it always had. I knew I could use Tyler's arrogance to my advantage, as he had no idea that this time, I was one step ahead of him. The days leading up to the party were an emotional roller coaster for me. Though my resolve was firm, the scars of the past still ached. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, haunted by Tyler's cruel words that had cut me like knives. But whenever doubts crept in, I thought of Caleb and the future he offered. That vision of tomorrow gave me the strength to keep moving forward. Caleb couldn't fully understand why I wanted this public confrontation with Tyler, but he supported me unconditionally. He never questioned my decisions, understanding that I needed to end this chapter on my own terms. Caleb kept reassuring me with that unwavering patience I'd come to value so deeply, promising to stand by me, no matter what happened. On the night of the party, I wore an elegant dress that I had tailored myself. The dress quietly spoke of everything I had accomplished since leaving my time with Tyler behind. Looking in the mirror, I felt more confident than ever before. I was no longer that insecure woman my husband had belittled. I had become strong, finally the master of my own destiny. When I arrived at the party venue, I could feel all eyes on me. As I expected, Tyler approached immediately, wearing that fake smile I knew so well, as if certain he could win me back. Tyler greeted me with fake warmth, taking my hand as if nothing had ever happened between us. I smiled back, but it wasn't the smile of a woman in love, it was the smile of someone who knew victory was finally within reach. I thanked him for his welcome, playing along with his charade. The party continued with whispers, clinking glasses, and superficial laughter filling the air. Tyler held me close as we arrived, clearly convinced he had everything under control. I wore my finest dress, one that showcased my newfound confidence, with a serene yet almost defiant smile that Tyler, in his arrogance, couldn't comprehend. He was so sure I couldn't resist him, believing as always that he held all the power. For the first few minutes, Tyler strutted among the guests with his usual air of superiority, acting as if everything was normal. People who knew him avoided mentioning the rumors of his infidelity, but I could sense their conspiratorial glances and whispers floating through the air. Tyler remained composed, seemingly enjoying having me by his side again as if our relationship had returned to normal. I observed his every calculated move in silence, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver my final blow. From the modest entrance of the venue, I could feel Caleb's watchful eyes on me. He was there at my request, to witness this final resolution. In the days leading up to this, Caleb had expressed his doubts, worried about how confronting my past this way might affect me. But I had assured him, with the calmness of someone who knew they were making the right decision, that this party wasn't about revenge but liberation. I told him that night I would leave everything in the past, and asked if he would be there waiting for me. Tyler, feeling in control, decided it was time for one of his usual public jokes. He raised his glass, commanding everyone's attention with his typical intimidating tone. He started a toast to me, his beloved wife, pausing for effect as all eyes turned to him. He made a cruel joke about how surprising it was that I had endured him for so long, adding that I must have found some value in it. Some guests laughed uncomfortably, trying to humor him. But I remained unmoved, setting my glass down on the table. The moment had come, I had waited patiently for this, and I was going to savor it. With determined steps, I walked toward the microphone Tyler had placed on the table. He watched me with curiosity, having no idea what was about to unfold. I picked up the microphone with steady hands, maintaining my composure as I ensured my voice would carry throughout the venue. I began by thanking everyone for being there that evening, my calm demeanor creating an air of anticipation. I announced that I had a confession to make, something I believed they all deserved to know. The whispers in the room grew louder. Tyler began to show signs of discomfort, his expression changing slightly, though he remained confident that nothing serious could happen. After all, he was sure I couldn't say anything more significant than him. Looking directly at Tyler, I confessed that my marriage had been a lie for a long time. I revealed how my beloved husband had betrayed me repeatedly, carrying on an affair with a dancer while I maintained our home and endured his contempt. The room fell into complete silence, the guests' faces frozen as if they couldn't process what they just heard. I watched as the color drained from Tyler's face. He tried to speak, but no words came out. I continued without hesitation. This was my moment of liberation, and I wasn't going to stop. I told everyone how I had endured public humiliation, cruel jokes, and endless contempt, but that it would end today. I announced that I wanted everyone to know that I was divorcing this man, and he no longer had any power over me. A stunned Tyler stepped toward me, trying to regain control, telling me we didn't need to do this and should talk privately. But I held up my hand to stop him, telling him this was the only conversation we needed to have, and it was over. Without giving him time to react, I turned toward the entrance. With genuine happiness in my smile, I announced that before leaving, I wanted to introduce someone. I called out to Caleb, asking him to join me. The graceful and calm Caleb walked toward me, while the guests watched in disbelief. Without hesitation, I took his arm and gave him a gentle kiss in front of everyone. The whispers in the room grew louder, but I wasn't listening anymore. I left Tyler standing paralyzed in the middle of the room, watching as the woman he'd taken for granted walked away with another man. No explanation or apology could undo what happened that night. Head held high, without looking back, I left the party with Caleb, leaving Tyler alone in the darkness of his own arrogance. The days following the party were filled with a mixture of relief and meaningful silence for me. I had revealed the truth, left a toxic marriage behind, and was ready to begin a new chapter. But there were still unresolved matters, a pending conversation with my mother, final arrangements with Tyler, and the move to a new city with Caleb that would mark my final liberation. The first important conversation was with my mother. Since the party, she had been confused and worried, unable to understand why I had agreed to see Tyler again after everything he'd done to me. She kept asking me, unable to hide her anxiety, why I had done such a thing. Finally, I decided to explain everything. Sitting in the living room with a cup of tea, I looked calmly at my mother, ready to explain. I told her firmly that it wasn't about reconciliation. I explained that it was a plan. I knew Tyler would try to humiliate me, publicly again, as he always did, and I needed to give him that stage he loved so much to expose his true nature to everyone. My mother fell silent in surprise. Despite her initial concerns, she couldn't help but feel proud of my courage. She gently asked what I planned to do next. I took a deep breath, as if that air could remove the last burden from my chest. I told her I was moving forward, that Caleb and I had chosen an apartment in another city where we could start fresh, away from everything. Mom looked at me with tears in her eyes. Tears of both farewell and pride. She finally knew I had chosen the right path to happiness. Meanwhile, Tyler seemed to be refusing to accept reality. Since the night of the party, he had been trying desperately to regain control. He kept sending me messages, wanting to meet, sometimes showing up at my door unannounced, trying desperately to convince me to come back. But every attempt hit an unshakable wall. I was no longer the woman he had manipulated for years. Just as I was packing the last box for the move, Tyler decided to make one final appearance. This time, I didn't avoid the confrontation. Determined to close this chapter of my life once and for all, I let him into the apartment. Tyler looked around the living room uncomfortably, as if sensing that this space we once shared was no longer his, and truly, it wasn't. He watched me packing with frustration, saying he couldn't understand why I was doing this, insisting we could still work things out. I looked at him with an unforgiving calmness, no anger or resentment left in my eyes, only peaceful certainty. I told him there was nothing left to fix, that we no longer existed. Tyler took a desperate step toward me, asking if I was really going with that man, with Caleb. I stared at him without blinking, firm in my decision. I confirmed. I was leaving with Caleb, adding that he should be grateful this was all that was happening. If he had tried anything else, he would be in jail instead of having this conversation. Tyler stepped back, shocked by the conviction in my words. It was a painful reflection of what he had lost and could never recover. In a whisper, still unable to understand how things had come to this, he asked why we couldn't try again. I placed the last box by the door and gave him one final look. The answer was simple, even if he would never understand it. I told him I wasn't the same person anymore, and I didn't want to be. The following days passed quickly, and the apartment emptied except for the memories I had chosen to leave behind. The move was simple. There weren't many material things that really mattered, and our most valuable possession was the freedom we had gained. Caleb arrived early with his car to help load the last boxes. In that moment, I felt as though I was leaving sadness behind and moving toward a future full of possibilities. I smiled watching him help me with that reassuring calmness of his, expecting nothing in return. Before getting in the car, I paused for a few seconds at the building's entrance and took a deep breath. It was a final goodbye, not just to the place, but to the life I had shared with Tyler. I knew he wouldn't be here to say goodbye. He was facing his loneliness in the prison of his own making. Caleb approached and put his arm around my shoulders, asking with a gentle smile if I was ready. I nodded, feeling a profound peace within me that I had never known before. We got into the car and began our journey toward a new life, without looking back. While I was blooming in my new phase of life, Tyler sank deeper into darkness. The house that was once a symbol of his control had become a quiet prison. His days passed without purpose, filled with emptiness and regret. Tyler tried to find solace in work, but office hours no longer provided sanctuary. Depression became his only constant companion. He attempted to reconnect with old friends, but they had distanced themselves, exhausted by his arrogance and manipulation. Even the dancer he had betrayed me with abandoned him, realizing there was no future with a man incapable of love. Tyler was alone, surrounded by material possessions that had lost all meaning. Every corner of the house reminded him of what he had lost: the laughter, conversations, and presence of the woman he had taken for granted. His regret was like an open wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Meanwhile, Caleb and I were building a new life filled with meaningful little moments. We settled in a new city and opened a sewing workshop together. Each piece I created was a symbol of my rebirth, proof that I was reclaiming my life and shaping it my way. Our afternoons were filled with outdoor walks, shared laughter, and common projects. For the first time in a long while, I felt I was exactly where I belonged. There were no ghosts of the past chasing me, only the present I had chosen for myself. One afternoon, while walking in the park, Caleb took my hand and looked at me with a smile. He asked if I realized how far we had come. I looked at him with gratitude, feeling that each day was a personal victory. I told him yes, and the best part was that this was just the beginning. I had found more than just new love, I had found the freedom to be who I had always wanted to be. While Tyler remained imprisoned in his emotional jail, I was moving forward with firm steps toward a future full of promise. And so, with a light heart and eyes fixed on the future, I closed the final chapter of my old life and began writing a completely new story. The sun gently streamed through our apartment windows, illuminating the new furniture and simple things Caleb and I had chosen together. Everything there had a purpose, to reflect the peace and freedom that now filled our lives. Nothing was luxurious, but genuine warmth radiated from every corner. The kind that only comes when a home is built from love, not appearances. For the first time in a long while, I woke up to simple happiness. The relief felt like a fresh breeze after a storm. The anxiety was gone, and I no longer carried painful memories as a burden. Turning in bed, I saw Caleb still sleeping, his peaceful breathing a stark contrast to the tumultuous days we had left behind. I got up slowly and headed to the kitchen. Making coffee had become a simple but meaningful ritual. Each morning represented a new chapter, free from the shadows of my past with Tyler. While pouring coffee into cups, I heard Caleb's footsteps approaching. He joked about me being an early riser while wrapping his arms around my waist. I smiled back, telling him I had plenty of reasons to wake up early. I didn't want to miss a single moment of this new life. We sat at our small dining table, enjoying the shared silence. No words were needed to understand how fortunate we were to have found each other in our respective storms. One evening, while resting on the balcony, I silently gazed at the horizon. The twinkling lights of the city were a promise of new possibilities. Caleb noticed my expression and looked at me tenderly. He asked if I was okay, though he already knew the answer. I nodded while resting my head on his shoulder, telling him I was better than okay. And so, with a light heart and eyes fixed on the future, I closed the final chapter of my past story and began writing a new one, without fear or limitations.
Thank you for listening to this moving story until the end. If you were touched by this story as much as we were, please like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more touching stories, unexpected turns, and life lessons. Please let us know in the comments which part impressed you the most and what you would do if you were in the characters' positions. We would love to hear your thoughts.